I think there's been a profound change, of course, which we're all very aware of in the last 10 years, allowing how much plasticity there may be in the nervous system. Certainly in my training days, we used to use terms like pre-dedicated for parts of the brain. It was understood, for example, that parts of the temporal lobe were dedicated or committed to auditory processing. But it's come out very clearly. I think it's a beautiful example of cerebral plasticity with regard to people born deaf who use sign language. One has very nice physiological evidence that the auditory cortex has been given another function. It's been reallocated for visual processing. I think this is sort of very spectacular. I think the degree of recovery and rehabilitation which may be possible after a stroke or after the resection of a tumor would not be possible without new tissue taking over some of the lost functions, although clearly there's a limit to which this can occur. You are generalizing here in terms of learning, and clearly all learning involves changes in the brain, and learning is possible to one's death. I know I've had a little example of this myself, because recently I've been going to a swimming guide because I wanted to alter my swimming. And it's interesting learning a new motor skill in one's 7th decade. It's not as easy as in your 1st or 2nd decade, but you can do it. And I'm sure that if one, as it were, had sufficiently sensitive brain imaging, one could see some of the changes which had occurred. Within limits, experience constantly molds the brain, and so the brain is as much a reflection of experience as it predetermines it. I mean, for this reason, all our brains become personal. You can have a heart transplant, you can have a liver transplant. There may be some problems with rejection. There is a certain immunological identity in the heart or the liver, but there's no personal identity. On the other hand, I don't think you can have a brain transplant because your brain is yours and your brain is you. And here we're coming back to the duality.
A ficção científica, acho que não.
They all enchanted me the most. When I'm attending to a person and thinking about them, they seem the most interesting in the world.
Yes.
It's I feel similar, say, with some of my students. If I'm asked which is my favorite student, they've all been my favorite students. So I'm not sure that I can really select, but I think among people I've seen recently, I have been very deeply moved by Temple Grandin, the remarkable autistic woman who is a professor of animal psychology and who has such a deep grasp and a passionate sympathy for the feelings and the thoughts of cattle, but is so puzzled by human behavior, although she always says she is studying us very closely, which is why she calls herself an anthropologist on Mars. But in a way, so much is missing for her, and yet she is searching for meaning and satisfaction and love and work, you know, as we all need. I think I've been especially moved by her, but I'm especially moved by everyone I see, and certainly by everyone I write about. I certainly think that stress in modern life and modern cities whether it's greater than it's ever been, I don't know. I'm sure it takes different forms, and in a city of 13 million, there are a great many forms it can take. Some of this, I think, has to do with physical, or in a way partly physical problems like congestion. We all need space. Animals need space. If you have 13 million people in one place, you're on top of each other. We are very crowded here. Traffic jams are particularly intolerable. You can't get away from people. Noise and smell are all around you. People don't have gardens. This is very much the case in New York, which is a city of apartments. I think one has to have contact with nature, one way and another. I think that the number of meaningful, I think meaning in work may get less. The artisan is disappearing. We've said earlier the pleasure and meaning of medicine, of being a doctor itself can be threatened. What else is happening? Well, as they say, to quote Nietzsche, God is dead, or the forms of spiritual security and comfort and dogma are under attack and can't fortify many people as before, and we break down in different ways. As a doctor, my first work was with patients with migraine. Now, migraine is a neurological disorder, a physiological disorder. The disposition to it is probably genetic, but the pressure to have attacks may depend very much on the pattern of people's lives, and I feel in a way that I partly got a picture of the stresses of life in New York through the pattern of my patients' migraines. But I think that when a symptom has been present for a long while, it is bound to become part of one's life, and it can only be eased out rather gently. I saw this sometimes with my awakenings patients. I remember one man in particular in whom the L-DOPA didn't seem to work, and then he said that he was afraid to show me how improved he was in case I made too many demands on him. A case which struck me very, very strongly, which I describe in Anthropologist on Mars, is of the blind man, a man blind from birth, who was persuaded in middle life to have surgery and restoration of vision. It was thought that this would be a wonderful gift and open his life. But in fact, although he could see everything, he had the greatest difficulty interpreting the world. you don't just see, you have to learn to see, and the visual parts of the brain just hadn't developed in this man, and he was thrown into a state of confusion and panic, and in a sense we had taken away his equilibrium, we had taken away his blindness. So I think
eu gostaria que o senhor falasse pouco sobre a narratologia.
In the case of this young woman who was quite severely retarded, but emotionally rich and healthy and well developed, there wasn't that much one could do medically or surgically. It was very striking to see how ritual and symbol and drama made sense to her, and how being part of a dramatic group and acting and performing roles gave her some identity in a way. You were asking earlier about selves and identity, and to some extent actors are given the identity of their roles, and it was remarkable to see how this retarded woman could act Ophelia and in a way expand into realms and roles which would have seemed impossible. Although I think we all do this in relation to art, and I think art has this, one of the functions of art is its possibility to enlarge consciousness in a radical way. I mean, none of us can compose like Mozart, but perhaps we can all appreciate him and be elevated and expanded to some extent. I spoke a little bit earlier about the power of narrative, of telling stories and following stories, say, developing in children much earlier than the ability to sort of read Euclid, although maybe with a Bertrand Russell it was the other way around. I think one sees in a way the converse of this sometimes in intellectual decline and Alzheimer's disease, where certain formal sorts of thinking may become difficult, but storytelling and acting and musical performance may still be very well preserved. But in general, I think with everyone, and Luria used to stress this very, very much, it's not just a question of looking at the disease or the defect, but also looking at what is strong. So Luria and Vygotsky especially spoke of this with regard to deaf children. They said, okay, so they're deaf. There's not that much you can do in auditory terms, but use their vision. And you know, my own book on deaf people is very much about vision, and it's not about the lack of hearing so much as the heightening of vision and the way in which a visual language and a culture become possible.